We are being streamed. Ladies and gentlemen, I invite you to the local government sessions and then to the next session, which will discuss challenges for both Poland and Ukraine in terms of providing healthcare. First, we kick off with local governments. You know the agenda. We have almost 3 hours to discuss this topic. Let me introduce our guests. Marek Wójcik, Plenipotentiary of the Association of Polish Cities for administrative matters. Marek will co-moderate this session, and thank you for joining us in the pre-election period. And CEO of EconMed, and strongly related with sanitary inspection, Professor Marcin Pasiarski, hematologist from the Świętokrzyskie Center, and Director Tadeusz Jędrzejczyk, Director of the Department of Health, Marshal Office of the Pomeranian Voivodeship. Joining us online is Marshal Roman Kołek, head of the Health Committee of the Association of Voivodeships. Please give us a round of applause. And we will also have Krzysztof Tomasiewicz with us, joining us online. Let us take our seats. We have quite a busy program for our session. We will do our best to keep to the time. We want to give you an introduction about the activities of local governments in terms of healthcare and prevention. I'd like to ask Marek Wójcik to start by giving us an introduction and discuss the challenges faced by local governments at the moment. He will also discuss the evolution of those challenges since the last session we had on this topic, and then we will move on to the presentations. Ladies and gentlemen, thank you so much. I got a few minutes, so I will be very concise. I just wanted to say to everyone who is implementing healthcare programs, you are great. Hats off to you. In these difficult times, when we find it difficult to balance revenues and expenditure, you succeed in clawing out money for healthcare. Hats off to you for that. You should also know that last year in Poland, local governments got 4.7% revenues more than in the previous year, but the inflation is above 14%. This is the real purchasing power of the funds we are receiving. It has dropped by about 10%. This year, we submitted to the agency 42 requests, but their structure is interesting. In vitro is 15, rehabilitation is 10, and others concern other different projects. But we have these two leaders, in vitro and rehabilitation. And this is also an important signal. The fourth issue, if you can't see it on the screen, you will see it in just a moment. I would like to encourage you to look at demographic forecasts of Poland statistics. For the first time, Poland statistics presented a forecast until 2060. It's a brand new forecast. It was published on the 31st of August and also incorporates what happened in 2020. So you can't have a more recent, more current forecast. And we should really recognize the conclusions. I only have 4 minutes to present this area. So let me just briefly sum up what you can find in the demographic forecast. First, something which was called a population pyramid. We won't have that anymore. The disproportion between births and deaths will be incredible. Recently, I visited Częstochowa. I looked up the figures for this city, and in 2060, Częstochowa will have just as a larger population as after World War II. So after 120 years, we have come back to the post-war situation. And this is a real, sad but true comparison. Fewer than 50 than half of the women will give birth to children in Poland. I won't tell you when I was born, but for my generation, this is a very bleak outlook because Poland's statistic predicts 792,000 births. And in 2060, and over the years, on average, it will be about 150,000 births. At the moment, Polish women give birth on average at the age of 31. One interesting fact about births is that the 35-42 age range accounted for 8% of births in Poland. And last year, it was about 18 years. So the births are happening at 18%. We will be experiencing some qualitative changes in the pre-working age between 0 and 7 years. We can see all the figures on the slide for those age brackets. And at the end of the year, 2060, in total, we will have just about 31,000. The greatest difference is in post-working age. We will have the highest increase here. We will be discussing public health in just a moment. The number of recipients will sharply increase. Therefore, you should start using the term the fourth age. The third age is 60 plus, 70 plus, and 80 plus, 90 plus is the age group that will greatly increase, and that's the fourth age for us. This is a completely different reality for public health. What is more, these young pensioners will be taking care of their elderly parents in the 80 plus 90 plus age group, which will not necessarily positively impact their own health. We must be aware of this as a society, as this will be a factor impacting the length of life. Now I'm showing you the 85-year-old age group and a couple of important moments in the future. In 2022, it was about 800,000. And in the scenario presented by Poland Statistics, this will reach 2.4 million, so 3 times as many. This number will be growing very dynamically until 2040. Then it will level out until 2060. The bluish stripe is the medium forecast, the most realistic one according to Poland Statistics, but still we have more than 1 million more people in this age group by 2060. Great discrepancies between voivodeships, so Polish regions. I would like to call on all local government officials to plan their actions so as to acknowledge these demographic changes. I'm very happy that Roman Kołek is with us today because his voivodeship was the first to introduce a demographic strategy. What is this map about? The lighter the color, the smaller the decrease. 3 voivodeship, Pomeranian, Mazowsze, and Lesser Poland, either voivodeships which lose 7 to 10% of its population. Świętokrzyskie will lose about 30% of its population, the highest number. The Vistula River is dividing us in 2 parts. And this is true also for the economic situation. Though in this case, this is not true. It's not true for demography. It's true for economy. We can see the dark green in Warmia Mazury, very high losses, but Podkarpackie voivodeship will not suffer such a great decrease, and Podlaskie voivodeship will not have such a sharp decrease in number. Let's move on to smaller administrative units, powiats. This color can differ depending on the screen. The original color is orange. That's where we will have a decrease in population, and green is where we will not have a decrease in population. Large cities and their vicinity, or powiats adjacent to large cities, will not suffer such a large decrease in population. For example, Poznań, Tri-City. Generally, the south and the north of Poland will be a very attractive place to live for the elderly due to demographic and climate-related conditions. And so this will impact demographics in these areas as well. Still, I encourage you to remember about demographics and look at programs aimed at the elderly. I've just discussed rehabilitation at the beginning. I mentioned that I'm happy that so many programs are targeted at the elderly and provide rehabilitation services. Thank you so much. It seems that every conference, every debate addressed at public health issues should begin with these few slides on demographics, so that this is etched into our memory and so that we take as many actions as possible in this direction. I'll start off with a couple of slides. We don't have a representative from the Ministry of Health with us, so until the very end, we hoped our MOH representative would show up and give us some information about the call for proposals announced by the ministry, financed from the medical fund, from the prevention sub-fund. Unfortunately, we don't have a representative of the ministry with us, but still we will shortly discuss this call. This competition was announced in December of the previous year, and it was to be closed in April of this year, but this happened in late August. Still, the competition was conducted. We have our own experience as the association I represent, because we helped out a couple of local governments in preparing their applications. Therefore, we participated in updating this program. We know what the application POPI program looks like. I will discuss this very happily with you, especially those who are traumatized by POPI. But what is most important is that it succeeded. This program has 75 million for funds for local governments. What did the logistics look like? On the basis of agency recommendations on prevention and early diagnosis of osteoporosis, local governments can receive 80% of this prevention fund. But the program, of course, had some additional requirements. Small local governments were preferred, communes with budgets between 250,000 to 1 million at most, until the time of submitting the application. I think this really is a great success, because together with money from the local governments, we have 93 million zlotys for the next 2 years from preventing osteoporosis. 112 local governments applied and 105 received funding. That is, among others, Bytoń, Tuchowo, Bątkowo communes. I won't list all the 105 successful applicants. I just want to list these names to show you that these are very small localities. Also, Bolesławiec, Piła, I added this on purpose, Gdynia, Warszawa, Sopot, and Toruń. And now we're keeping our fingers crossed for the launch of these programs by the local governments. Resolutions have been passed in most communes and they are ready to be initiated. It's great that this program was launched and conducted. We have some relatively coherent actions in public health and relatively high funding. What next? That's the question that comes up now, and that's the question to our panelists. Let me start with Marshall Kolek. Mr. Marshall, what are the next healthcare areas that should be included in such public competitions? Of course, if the ministry decides to announce further calls. I, as an observer and in part as a participant, would like such competitions to be held because we have already tested this pathway. Most local governments have made it through the POPI system. They've acquired more knowledge. They understood how much in advance they should apply. Maybe the system will be improved. Whatever happens, the Ministry of Health also has tested a pathway for verification for administrative and formal issues and also substantive ones. So I hand over to Mr. Marshall. Please answer my question.
In this important debate where health policy is an important element of our public life, in my opinion, what was already mentioned by Marek Wójcik, for which I am grateful, is that how much the local governments have reduced funds, and then using different methods, that the self-governments were tasked with additional obligations. This is not a good situation. The idea of uniforming and introducing consistency to healthcare is justified. However, centrally organized competitions are not a bad idea, but I'm a strong advocate of regional strategies, which need to have additional sources of funding to be effective. We know that health education is incredibly important, also in the context of unnecessarily spent funds on COVID vaccines, which are now the subject of scandals. This all shows that in public health, we are not coping that well with fund allocation. I think that the pilot programs implemented by various regions in the form of various interventions are a great way of implementing good, sound objectives, which can reduce mortality, morbidity, and which contribute to a safer life of our communities. I am in favor of what Marek Wójcik mentioned. The number of in vitro programs submitted is best proof that local governments are seeing the current challenges. My Opolskie voivodeship is also offering such a program. It's a program which offers all parents, not only in the context of in vitro, but also some controversial issues. This gives us a choice, gives those people a chance to become parents. So I'm a strong advocate of that, because in the context of taking funds away from local governments and instead applying competitions with unclear requirements is not the best way to strengthen the role of local governments. I, as a person who had been invested in such programs in the past, I think that we need a sound regional governance. So, to sum up, less centralization and more autonomy for the regional governments. Yes, definitely, that's the key message. At the beginning of this session, what Marek Wójcik mentioned, we need to factor in the demographic issues. we need to diagnose soundly what the situation is, what it will be. This shows best how important it is to provide the communities with specific health services, specific products, providing them with education, so that something that happens closest to their places of residence is effective. We were against spending money without sound reasons, because that did not result in stopping the depopulation process. We need to create safe conditions, conditions of safety, not just in regard to health, but also support for small companies. All that are important arguments which should help us choose which programs should be focused on. Diabetes is an important area where we should also focus, but we should use the latest, most high-end solutions for those programs. And now I would like to ask also Marcin Wójcik to comment on that, who, apart from being a representative of the Association of Police Cities, he's also the member of the a body bringing together local governments and central government. Well, yes, actually, I cooperate even more often with MPs than local government authorities, because central MPs need more explaining. Coming back to osteoporosis, I don't want to be anyone's enemy, but why would you choose osteoporosis? You can look for a program for the years 2021-25, and you will not find that. So if we decide to implement such a program, who should have a strategic importance, that should be reflected in the national program. But right now we are talking about a program which took the Ministry of Health 4 years to prepare. Until now, of the four of the medical funds, not even 1 zloty was spent on such programs from the medical fund. Starting from the launching of the contest until the selection of the projects, a year passed. I hope that in the future that process will be streamlined. But you know that I don't beat around the bush. Someone got into the Ministry of Health and managed to get their project through and get funding for it. It is valuable, and those programs are interesting and valuable, but we should respect one another when we are talking about a strategic document. Yes, definitely I am in favor. But when it comes to the autonomy of regional government units, so local perspectives on spending funds differ significantly. Some people from the north claim that they know more about certain topics. When it comes to division between voivodeships, I think that the recent years have already shown a significant increase in the number of projects implemented by specific voivodeships. It is good to launch such umbrella initiatives that were mentioned.
I'm glad to see partnerships being created under such umbrella projects, and also acquiring EU funds. I don't want to mention which ones, national recovery plans or different, but we have the end of the second year of the perspective until 2027, and not all has been launched. But I don't want to discuss politics here, and I'm not talking about us gathered here. I just don't want us to quarrel. I want us to use the funding. This funding is incredibly important for us. One more issue I want to discuss. When you're talking about the structure of the program, we've mentioned here, out of those 42 areas, just a few were related to vaccination. Well, I remember that 40 or 45% of the programs reported to the agency were connected with vaccination. I would like to call on you not to resign from vaccination programs. Even if they're not about vaccination per se, they can be about education. Don't stop doing that. A free vaccination, in theory, is provided, and our citizens are so aware that they want to go and get the vaccination, they want to get the jab, they will go to their GP or a pharmacy specialist. But we need them to be informed. We've been encouraging them to do that, and then we provided these programs directly. And I want to ask you to remember about this educational aspect. If you have a vaccination project, remember about awareness raising. If I may, just a couple of words about vaccination. I think education should be aimed not just at our population, but also at our medical staff. We'll come back to this issue in a moment. I think it's very pertinent, and the professor has a lot of experience in this area. Some very positive experience, of course. Thank you for mentioning education. Just recently, we had a V-Forum meeting. This project evolved from the Polish nationwide influenza combating program. And Professor Adam Antak is the head of the scientific board. And recently, a lot of good things have been done about vaccination. Free vaccination against influenza for children and youth. And our association has also contributed to this. We had some model prevention programs that we ran for children, for pregnant women, influenza for the elderly, and pneumococci for population above 65 years of age with chronic diseases. This is something very interesting. All clinicians agree that the role of local governments in education about prevention of infectious diseases is vital, because there are not so many signals in public space that you should get vaccinated. We will have a presentation on HCV. Only 12.6% of children among a population of 800,000 were vaccinated. So these are very low figures. They're actually pretty dramatic. We should be engaging in education. Together with Professor Antak, we agreed on some milestones for the coming year. The CESTAC Association is working on a model educational program on preventing infectious diseases, which we will make available to local governments. We will cooperate with all environments to come up with a way of effectively reaching beneficiaries. It's not just about handing out leaflets, but really convincing the unconvinced. In the meantime, what we would really like is to eliminate quasi-education. I just want to mention those who believe vaccination against HPV is considered to be the sexualization of children, and we don't want any actions of that sort. During that meeting I mentioned, Professor Kuchar, the previous president of a diabetological association, gave us the example of how to lead a conversation with a patient. We have free vaccinations for senior citizens. What does that mean? That these senior citizens should know about it. Tomorrow in Krakow we have a conference on senior patients, we should have some information about this. But in the case of pneumococci, what does this mean? Professor Kuchar said if a patient gets a prescription for a drug for a longer period of time, for a couple of months, if that patient does not get a referral for a vaccination, the patient should ask for a vaccination. And we should explain that in very simple terms. Understandable for local government officials. Sorry, that was a slip of tongue. I meant understandable for patients. Let's go to the Pomeranian voivodeship and our speaker from that region. What kind of programs and what scale of programs are needed? First of all, let me criticize what has been heard here. A lot of voivodeships have invested in regional programs to reach citizens and patients. They were supposed to complement individual patient accounts. I'm talking about the e-services, but recently we found out that the demarcation line has been outlined in such a way that we can't really do anything about it. We can run some programs, but they can't be combined with the data, so we don't know who we should be targeting. If we are to educate, we need to know who our recipient is. We reach people before retirement age differently, and pensioners differently, and people from different risk groups differently. The second issue of funding. The pool of funding is smaller, and as institutions managing EU funds, Polish voivodeships are also dealing with a specific challenge, that is the diminished amount of funds. There were two elements here. That was the transformation. So those economies based on fossil fuels and social transformation. The Pomeranian voivodeship really is witnessing small amounts of support, though this concerns the whole region of Western Pomerania and a wide range of entities. Now to say something positive, what are we trying to do, and what I think is translating into positive things is an attempt at integration with local governments at the same level. We're not trying to impose anything, but encourage or set an example. We've been discussing the pneumococci vaccination program, but when the pandemic broke out, we had EU funding that helped us ensure continuity. So this is functioning, this is working. But there's another group of challenges. In our diabetes program, we're still running this program. Part of this program has been closed down, but we still have a couple or just a month to go. And what I mean here is cooperating with employers. This program was aimed at the labor market to keep people in the labor market. There's a lot of work ahead of us because employers don't really understand the purpose of this program, even though they're coming to the end of the program, even though they see the challenge that buying medical packages is not a good job benefit. They don't know where to look for other incentives. And here local governments can create incentives that employers can use to attract employees. Thank you so much. Cooperation between local governments and the labour market and necessary medical examinations keeps coming up when we discuss this with physicians active in this area. I asked the director to take the floor at the end of this module so that we can move on to diabetology. And we will have a short presentation summing up diabetology-related programs. But first, let me show you just a couple of my slides.
The paradigm has changed, as we said internally in our association. paradigm with regards to treating diabetes. Right now, we have devices which measure continuously the glycemic level. There is strong evidence that it helps control the glycemic level and reduce the number of complications, especially long-term complications. This applies to various types of complications. So we have to take that into account, especially that we'll have more and more cases of diabetic patients. So when planning our actions, obviously we should first of all integrate our efforts, and also if we are to support the system and educate people, we have a number of good tools. How should we educate patients and whom should we educate? Because for some people we have reimbursement. In other cases, reimbursement doesn't apply. This is a summary. 8 local governments spent in total, planned to spend on prevention of diabetes 90 million Polish zloty. That's a lot of money. So I have a few examples of positive opinions of the president of the Polish HTA agency, for example, regarding the Gliwice region. There was a struggle to improve the project, and this is the best example that it is worth to fight for your programs. Even if you get a negative opinion at first, you can always correct things and then receive a positive opinion. Most programs regarded prevention and diagnostics to detect undetected diabetes in patients, but there were also programs regarding diabetic retinopathy. And this is also an example. If someone doesn't put the effort in, can get a negative result from the president of the Polish HTA agency. And this is an example from the Dolnośląskie, so Lower Silesia województwo. That's a lot of money spent on the program. Very often with EU funds, we are talking about a different scale of prevention. So I encourage you to continue taking prevention initiatives. And now, as we always need, good support. Now I would like Mr. Jędrzejczyk to take the floor. So if you could please pull up my slides. Indeed, our program has a long history because the discussions started taking place a few years before the current EU perspective. We talked about where should we take the funds for that, but the idea to have a diabetes prevention program has been discussed at length. So it was a long discussion how we approach the program, how should we solve the problem at the source. So very often we tend to forget about diabetes. It's good that a lot of voivodeships initiate some projects, but half of the voivodeships don't. Why? Because there are other topics which are quicker killers. So we have the whole list of. So we're also facing the problem of multimorbidity with hypertension, with diabetes. Before we get complications, diabetes tends to be not particularly spectacular, so it's often overlooked. And where we have well-educated patients who are aware of how diabetes can be managed, it can be done well. So the higher class is not really concerned with diabetes because it doesn't have to be. However, to present you with the dynamic of the growth of cases and incidence of diabetes. So the aging of the population will obviously increase the morbidity. I will probably we'll probably have fresher data soon enough. However, there were a lot of analysis of direct and indirect costs. We know that this is not a cheap disease. Obviously, we have various complications like retinopathy and complications related to various organs, and that involves various costs. Why does the problem become a more advanced one? The first thing is the change of the lifestyle. First of all, globally, the physical activity of our population has been dropping. This has been evidenced in a lot of studies. So, if we don't fix that, we will not solve the problem. We work differently. In the past, there was more physical activity involved in our workplaces. Right now, we have stress-inducing, sedentary type of work among a lot of people, and then people return home, and they are also overloaded with information. We also have an unresearched set of pro-inflammatory factors in the food, in the air, even in the water. This is something which needs to be the subject of further research, but we know that these are factors that also are impacting the incidence of diabetes. I also had a look at the problem from a different perspective. We talked about programs from the point of view of EU projects. There are a lot of EU projects with diabetes in its name. We had 49 different programs where most were concerned with work and social integration, and only 4 were in the health area. So only 4 voivodeships that are presented on the slide proposed such projects. When it comes to projects carried out in the Pomeranian voivodeship, we'll probably be talking about that in greater detail later on. However, we still haven't closed enrollment, and 11,000 people were covered by the program, and 2,900 people were found to be pre-diabetic, and 200 were confirmed to have diabetes. It's interesting that there's a more share of women than men in this population, and we also try to address working population. That was successful. What are the conclusions? First of all, in terms of population, the program is successful, but it is also successful when it applies only to a small proportion of the population. So with 2.3 million people in the voivodeship, the number of people covered was quite insignificant. But to cover more people, we would need more funds. So we have to search for new technologies which can help us be more effective. So I would also like to say a few words about the national health program, where the decision makers have opted against presenting detailed objectives. So the methodology was changed, and we upped in a situation where the program is not feasible. When it comes to challenges, is the workforce, the people who can work in those programs, work organization within the program, coping with new technologies, also the possibility of continuous measurement of results, and the endless red tape, the bureaucracy. It's difficult to convince everyone that public funds can be spent in a transparent manner without unnecessary bureaucracy. When it comes to challenges for the recipients, people tend to claim they don't have the time, they are not aware enough, or do not have the knowledge. And obviously, bureaucracy also applies. It deters people from participating. When we are talking about preventing diabetes or postponing it in time, we should keep in mind a few elements which should upscale the program to cover more people, a greater number of patients. So the only change introduced by the system was, for example, introducing the so-called sugar tax. Apart from diagnosing programs, we have to internalize the results of the program. We have to make sure that the recipients understand what we are trying to do. We should keep in mind people who might not be diabetic at the given moment. We have to reinforce their health attitudes so that they do not get sick in the future. We also have to support the community settings. We have to foster education to make sure that people make health choices more automatically and in an easier way.
Thank you so much, Mr. Director. It's always a pleasure to listen to your comments. All the more that we know how dedicated you are to prevention, I think everyone knows about that. Diabetic programs and programs aimed at preventing civilizational diseases must run in the long term. Apart from education, we need to take vaccination into account. Then, after the vaccination, we move on. Sorry, when we have a vaccination program, then it's enough to give someone the vaccination. And if we have a diabetes program, then we have to continually monitor the glycemic level or someone's weight and so on. So our next speaker, Mr. Krzysztof Tomasiewicz, I'm sure you've been discussing the directions of healthcare policy in the case of diabetology. In which direction should we go with the program? So what my great friend, Mr. Jędrzejczyk, just presented confirms that pilot programs, experiments, introducing different educational solutions and directly reaching those interested is very important. And we need to attach a lot of importance to the inspiration coming from LGUs know how to work with patients better. Of course, using the most recent tools and methods and evidence-based practices is the foundation of effective procedure in this case. We need to reach common ground in this area. I think that we're not suffering from a shortage of people in Poland to work out good solutions without political influences, but taking into account demographics and state-of-the-art knowledge. So let us give them the opportunity to implement such solutions. I think we will all agree that such solutions can be introduced at local government level and can draw from good experiences. I think this is pivotal to test methodology, to improve methodology, to reach our recipients. I think that many LGU officials and also those promoting public health set an example and show the good things that can be done just by individually becoming involved in prevention to prevent complications or an acute stage of the disease. And I think that a lot of people are involved in this. It's not just about diabetes. We had different solutions in Poland in the past. And we're introducing solutions that have already been present in the Czech Republic. They are mobilizing people to take up more physical activity. For example, they provide cycling helmets to their patients. And this resulted in an increase in physical activity consisting in cycling, in tourism. I think that we should look at such solutions. Many insured persons are aware that their personal commitment translates if that was the case, that their personal dedication translated into good access to medical services, they would really make an effort. And we can do that in partnership between LGUs and the medical environment. And we should do that for all areas, not just diabetes. So that's a task for Marek Wójcik, as he's the link between LGUs and the government. That's a bit more work for you on top of what you already have on your plate. Let me just comment. We need coordination. In the case of diabetes, in a moment, we will reach 10% of our population which are affected by such risks. Statistically, this is a large group, and we should adopt a systemic solution to this problem and treat it seriously. I said seriously because in 2017, the Polish Supervision Authority conducted an inspection and produced a report that is still applicable to our current situation. A month ago, maybe a bit more, the president of the National Health Fund issued a resolution on a program which is to be implemented in Poland about treating diabetes foot. There are 7 million zlotys allocated to this program. And it's close to us, to LGUs, and that's a big mistake. Sorry for repeating the same conclusions again and again. When will we be able to combine local government fundings with funds from the National Health Fund to conduct much needed programs? I keep calling for this, and I ask you to call for that as well. We would add our local government funding on top of those 6 millions from the National Health Fund, and this would be effective. Thank you for this appeal. We have 130 viewers online, perhaps also representatives of state institutions. Just a quick question to Mr. Director. Yesterday, we talked offline about using modern technologies. As I analyze what is going on in diabetes prevention programs, and I see that in some voivodeships, they just didn't go through. Evidence-based medicine here, glycemia levels, and find risk tests. Sometimes the National Health Fund can offer the very same medical services. So how can we find something innovative about prevention, about educating patients, about how they can live with diabetes, how they can put off the onset of complications? We were thinking about these new technologies for monitoring, for constant monitoring of glycemia levels. But we have to teach patients how to do that. We have to show them the device, show them the application. Maybe it could use some elements of gamification for the patient to see how the patient's behavior influences the sugar levels. I think images speak louder than words, so we could use such mobile applications or IT solutions. But how could we do that? We already have such possibilities, and I hope that they will be becoming cheaper, because that's the financial hurdle for LGUs to buy them. But there is the possibility of internalizing these situations. In rural areas, we performed certain examinations, but we had to stop our program because we had to wait for the Ministry of Health to implement such examinations permanently. This gives patients a sense of self-control. Of course, it has to be verified by real medical examinations and check how patients are responding to such solutions. I think that for a large part, but not for all patients, this can be a permanent solution. The educational effect cannot be overestimated. We need patients to use such solutions. Also, patients which have pre-diabetes patients, also need to receive such education, and we need to learn how to implement this. We've been conducting analyses to identify patients for whom this will be most effective. Mr. Director, could you describe the process of selecting, of finding patients in a database if we had such a regional program? How can we effectively reach patients with information about these solutions? We have a demarcation line in Poland now, but that doesn't mean it will be there always. Yes, the intention is to integrate regions. First of all, medical examinations connected with professional activity, databases on patients, regional platforms. Some voivodeships are shutting down these programs, some are still trying to continue with these programs. So the situation is complex in Poland. Still, if we had such data entered upon a working safety examination, we would receive information about high sugar levels, and this would be a signal to start diagnosing diabetes or pre-diabetes. This is also a signal for the GP of that patient coming through that platform. And the next time that the patient comes in for a checkup or with some illness, the GP will see that there is a warning signal that we need to check for diabetes, and they can provide the patient with devices or applications and some educational material as well. So education and communication, thank you so much. Let's move on to infectious diseases. We're looking for common ground between diabetes and HCV. I have one. They are most often silent diseases. They don't give any symptoms at the beginning. As Professor Czupryniak once said, diabetes is a boring condition because nothing really happens at the beginning. And in the case of HCV, it's also a boring illness. If you have hepatitis C, it takes 2 years to experience the first symptoms. But already vast changes have taken place in the human body. LGUs have a large role to play in this area, as they have been deburdened from financing vaccination, which has been taken over by the ministry. So they can look into prevention of infectious diseases. That's why we've invited Director Tomasiewicz from the Medical University in Lublin I hand over to the professor to discuss prevention of infectious diseases, as this is one of the goals listed by the WHO's to get rid of HCV by 2030. And I hand over to you, Mr. Professor. Thank you very much for the invitation. I have quite a long presentation, but I won't bore you with all the slides. Before I move on to discussing HCV, which is probably a well-known problem, let me just say that in the case of diabetes, vaccination, and HCV, we have to take into account one important thing. One of the elements of LGU activity must involve contact with the family doctor. The family doctor must know what role he or she must play in LGU activity. I'll show you in a moment that also in the case of HCV, it turned out that our problem was actually solved, because since the 1st of July of 2022, family doctors can prescribe such examinations as are necessary. So that's what we thought, but the regulation introduced last year didn't really change much in the HCV situation. So quickly about prevention of infectious diseases. This is a unique opportunity to eliminate chronic inflammation conditions. We are preventing acute or fresh infections. You're all aware of what these are. They're in the vaccination timetable, and this is obvious. While chronic diseases, well, we weren't capable of preventing those. But now we have advanced modern therapies which we can use to eliminate chronic diseases, including HCV. We have a 100% effectiveness of such therapies. I love this slide that I'm showing you now, because this slide explains why LGUs should deal with HCV. We're not capable of getting rid of HIV from the patient. We can't eliminate that infection. The same goes for HBV. And in the case of HCV, we can eliminate that virus in full from the patient's body. LGUs should really look carefully at this slide. It's important for LGUs, for politicians, for all decision makers. This is the grounds for success. By diagnosing and treating patients with HCVs, we're destined for success. We can always help them. In most cases, we will prevent the progress of disease. We will eliminate any complications and negative symptoms and eliminate the infection. So this is a win-win situation for everyone. Of course, the pandemic has impacted diagnosing HCV, not just in Poland, but across the globe. Still, we're coming back to the pre-pandemic levels in terms of diagnosing HCV. Still, we believe that this figure is way too low. We can see 2020, a sharp drop, but after that, at the end of 2022, we've started diagnosing higher numbers of patients. This shows we're going in the right direction, but still, this figure is too low. Let's look at the prevalence. Diabetes is present in 10% of the population, and here in HCV, 0.4 to 0.9 in certain populations of patients. Someone can say this is not much, but that's not true, because most of the infected are exposed to what you can see in this slide. That is cirrhosis or hepatocellular carcinoma. If we catch the infection at an early stage, we can stop this change of harmful progress. So it's really worth preventing. But as Tomek said at the beginning, we can't see those patients.
ten pacjent jest zakażony, a
We
ten nie
can't
jest
tell
zakażony,
which
to on
patient is
w tym pierwszym
infected
okresie, kiedy najlepiej jest
because in the
diagnozować
very
COVID,
first stage,
nie ma
the best
wpisane na
stage for
czole, że
diagnosis and
zakażenie
treatment,
jest COVID, nie ma
it's
żadnych
not
objawów.
clear.
A więc
We,
tym
we can't
bardziej
see the
ta
symptoms, so we can't
efektywne
identify
działanie ze
the
strony
affected patients.
samorządów, ze
Therefore,
strony lekarzy
effective
rodzinnych,
LGU and family
wszystkich służb
doctor
dobrej woli, które
activities and
zaangażowane w
all
to,
those
jest
interested, all
konieczne.
people of goodwill, so
Powinniśmy
to say,
myśleć za tych
these
ludzi,
actions are
powinniśmy ich troszkę
incredibly
tak na siłę
necessary because we have
zdiagnozować, a
to
więc
sort of force
dawać
patients
takiego
to be
certyfikatu na
diagnosed.
siebie
We have to force even
zakażenia,
those
powinniśmy im
people who do not think they have an
zaproponować
infection,
do
and
diagnostyki.
we should
Proszę
provide them
Państwa,
with an
oczywiście
opportunity
nie
of
martwcie
medical
się, że będę Państwa
examinations.
jakimiś szczegółami, ale ten
Don't worry
wykres
that
akurat
I'll
jest
be
ważny.
boring you with
Dlatego, że jeżeli
a lot
Państwo
of
zobaczycie
details, but
sobie
this graph
wykres
is
sobie po prawej stronie
interesting.
powyższy
This graph to the
poszczególnych
right with
lat,
the
to
three
są
curves
krzywdy, które
over
mówią
time.
o
These
zdekompensowanych
curves
właściwie
are
nowych
talking about
wymiarach
decompensated
antybiotykowych. Zobaczcie Państwo, że
cirrhosis
te
and
szczyty tych
hepatocellular
przypadków,
carcinoma. We can see
osób
that the
z
number of
zdekompensowanym
cases
nowotworem
with
zakrwionym,
cirrhosis
one
and
są cały czas przed
liver
nami.
carcinoma,
Byli na tygodniach, myśmy nie widzieli pacjenta z
this is
ciężkim
still ahead of
rozpocznym
us.
brakiem
Every
krwi
week we
w krwiodawstwie.
diagnose a
Stopy często
patient
są
with
naprawdę
these
mocne,
diseases,
a
and
więc
often
te
these are very
działania
young
muszą być
patients.
podejmowane w
Therefore,
bardzo
we must be
pilny
taking
sposób.
these
Proszę
actions, these
Państwa,
preventive
również
actions,
patrząc ze strony
very
ekonomicznej,
urgently.
zobaczcie Państwo, to się
Now,
każdemu
an
opłaci.
economic
Te
perspective.
totalne
This is
koszty, całkowite
beneficial
koszty
to
leczenia tych
everyone.
pacjentów,
Total
którzy
costs
mają
of treating
zaawansowaną
patients with advanced cirrhosis or hepatocellular
wielokrotnie
carcinoma
wyższe
are
od
much
leczenia
higher
i postępowania z
than the
pacjentem, który nie
costs
ma
of
zaawansowanego.
diagnosing
A
and
więc
treating
od strony
patients
ekonomicznej to w ogóle nie ma dla
who do
dentysty
not have an
żadnej
advanced
dyskusji.
illness
Proszę
of this
Państwa,
sort.
tak jak powiedziałem,
So this
diagnozowanie
is
i
obvious.
rozpoznawanie zakażenia
As,
HCV
as I've
powinien być
said,
zaangażowany lekarz rodzinny,
the
ale w
family doctor should
zależności
be
od tego,
involved
do
in
jakiej
diagnosing
godziny
and
zrobił
treating
wycieranek,
HCV
to nie jest takie
infections, but
oczywiste, kto,
it's
gdzie,
not
jak, kiedy najłatwiej tego
that
pacjenta
obvious when
zdiagnozować.
we
W
look
tej
at
chwili
the
mamy
sources of finding
sporo
out about an
zakażeń
infection.
osób po
At the moment, we have a lot of infections in young people, and
a
those young
więc
people
tym bardziej
don't
powinniśmy
go to family
kierować
doctors.
prewencyjne działania
Therefore,
pewne
that should be our target
screeningowe,
population
przesiewowe. Tu jest
for
ogromna rola
screening
dla
programs.
samorządów, dla
This is
tych
where
osób, które
LGUs can step
zaangażują się
in
w
and play a
diagnozowanie
major
tych
role
pacjentów.
in
A
diagnosing those
więc cel
patients.
podstawowy mamy
The
zabójstwo
primary
krwiowe
goal
poważnej choroby.
is to
Mamy
prevent
poprawić
the
jakość życia.
development of
To
a
są takie
serious
slajdy, którymi
disease
zawsze
and
pokazujemy i
improve the
którymi
quality of life. I always show these
wielokrotnie
slides
pacjenta
because they
wyleczonego jest
show
mniejsza szansa, praktycznie
that
żadnej,
in a
żadnego
treated
ryzyka
patient,
na rozwój
there is no
odpowiednich
risk
zdarzeń, a
of the
jak często
development
te
of adverse
niekorzystne
effects.
zdarzenia nie
And it
wykorzystaną
shows
Państwa
how often
występują
these
u
adverse
osoby, która
effects
nie została
occur
zdiagnozowana, nie
in
została wyleczona.
undiagnosed and
To są krzywe,
untreated
które się
patients.
rozchodzą, które pokazują,
We
że
have these curves which are
pacjent wyleczony na
diverging.
wczesnym etapie
We can
choroby
see the
nie
patient
ma praktycznie żadnego
who
ryzyka
has been
rozwoju raka
healed
płucnowodowego krwowego.
at an early
Czyli
stage of the
ACC
disease, and the
i co
risk of
najważniejsze, te
developing
efekty
HCC
są
is
trwałe,
practically
następują po latach.
negligible.
Więc
We can also
przygotowanie
see that
odpowiedniego
the treatment
reprezentacji,
effects are
poprawa
sustainable, are
dłużej tego
durable. We can
pacjenta
see a
ochronić
5-year
niedługiego
follow-up, and
dnia, szybciej
from the
poprawi
AMBER study,
stan,
we can
lepsza
see
jest
that
kondycja jego
over
wątroby. No
time
i
the
to o czym
condition of the
powiedział
liver
Tomek,
improves.
a więc cele do eliminacji zostały ujęte
And I'll
również w
repeat what
przeświadczeniu
Tomek
decyzyjnym
said. The
jako zadanie na
WHO
przyszły
has
kraj.
set
Zobaczcie Państwo,
HCV
te
elimination as its
są
goal by
ambitne i niełatwe,
2030.
dlatego że
These
tak,
goals are ambitious, but not
65%
that
redukcja i
ambitious.
70% redukcja.
We can see a reduction
Celem złych
by
indywidualnych, celem
65% and then by
konkretnym,
90%.
ale niech
These are
pójdziemy
not
sobie
some
na krok,
overly
mamy
ambitious,
szansę
overarching
na
goals.
osiągnięcie tych
Let's see
celów
what our
w
chances
produkcie
are
zdrowego
for
kraju. Nie
achieving
ma
those
mocy
goals.
na
Well,
wiele
the
tych
situation is
ogłoszonych
not that
celów,
rosy in this
ale tak
case.
naprawdę szanse
The
są niewielkie.
chances are
Problem
slim.
jest w tym, że tutaj macie Państwo kluczowy slajd. Główna bariera eliminacji
That's
HCV
because
w Polsce
the
to
main
jest
barrier to eliminating
niedbała
HCV in
zdiagnozowania
Poland
osób,
is
ale oczywiście w
the
konsekwencji
insufficient
wyleczonych.
number of
I
diagnosed
tutaj
and therefore
my się
treated
deklarujemy, że
patients.
każdego
We
zdiagnozowanego
declare
pacjenta jesteśmy w
that
stanie
we are
uleczyć,
capable of
ale
treating
z
every
kolei naszymi
diagnosed
siłami nie
patient.
jesteśmy w stanie tych wszystkich pacjentów
But we
wychwycić,
don't have the
zdiagnozować z
workforce to
populacji
identify and
ogólnej. A
diagnose
więc
all
patrząc na perspektywę
the
eliminacji
infected
globalnej,
patients in our
eliminacji
population.
CDC w Polsce,
So
tutaj
looking at
założymy
eliminating
my się
hepatitis C
tutaj
in
kształtujemy,
Poland,
teraz Państwu
well,
pokażę,
Poland
w około 50 2050-2055 roku.
will reach this goal by
Bezwzględnego
about
masowo
2050,
rozwijającego się
2055.
nowych możliwości testowania w
And just a
gabinetach
couple
lekarzy
of words
rodzinnych
about new
jest
possibilities of
ustalenie
testing in
rządu i
at
także
family
polityków
doctors. That is the main
przyjmowane, bo
argument
już
raised by
narzędzia
politicians,
są
that
uruchomione.
there's no
Ale
problem
zobaczcie
here because the
Państwo,
tools have already
jakie
been
byłyby tego
introduced.
efekty.
But look
Ile
at the
tych
effect
badań
that
w
this brought
ciągu
about. How
6
many
miesięcy, w ciągu
examinations
5
were
miesięcy,
conducted over
15
5 months?
tysięcy, a więc rocznie
15,000.
będzie około
That gives us
37-38
30
miesięcy. Żeby
six,
dokonać
37,
eliminacji zakażeń HPV w Polsce
38,000
na
per
skalę
year.
WHO, my
In
powinniśmy
order
około
to
1,5
achieve
do 2 milionów badań robić rocznie. A
goals,
więc
we need to perform
rozbieżność
1.5 to
pomiędzy
2 million
możliwościami
examinations a year. So
chęcią
the
troszkę też
discrepancy
przez lekarzy
between what we
rodzinnych,
would like to do and
ale
what we're
głównymi
capable
wątpliwościami
of
to tamten
doing
zapis
is
jest tak
still
zrobiony,
there.
że tak jak słyszałem od lekarzy rodzinnych, oni po prostu nie mogą robić zbyt wiele badań.
The
A więc
law
ta rozbieżność
currently
między
in
tymi
Poland
możliwościami
prevents
a
family doctors from
potrzebami
prescribing
badań jest
all the
olbrzymia.
necessary
Czyli
medical
reasumując,
examinations.
w
So the
dalszym
needs here
ciągu
are
bardzo
immense.
liczymy na to, że
To sum up,
samorządy pomogą
we
jak
really hope
najwięcej
that
rozwiązać
LGUs
problem
will
zakażenia
help
HCV
us
w
resolve the
porozumieniu
problem
i
of
we współpracy ze
HCV
wszystkimi, z
infections
ekspertami, z
in
lekarzami
cooperation with
rodzinnymi.
everyone, experts,
I
family
tak jak
doctors.
chciałem tutaj króciutko pokazać,
And I
bez
just
tych
wanted to show
działań
you
naprawdę
quickly here
ciężko
that it will
cokolwiek
be very
osiągnąć,
difficult to
bo
achieve anything without
my
such
naprawdę robiliśmy
cooperation with
bardzo wiele,
LGUs.
robiliśmy
We've really
różne
done a lot.
kampanie
We've conducted
sponsorowane,
many sponsored
niesponsorowane,
and not
różnymi siłami,
sponsored
po
campaigns.
kilkaset
We've
tysięcy
used
najprościej
different
robiliśmy badań,
means, a couple of
a w Polsce
thousands
powinniśmy robić pewnie
studies,
10 tysięcy badań.
examinations
Nasz
every
szefak
year.
celu WHO to jest
While
około 3 miliony
in the
rocznie.
Polish primary
I
care, it's
ostatni
about
slajd, a więc
50,000 annually.
szacunki do osiągnięcia celu
The last
WHO do
slide, the
2030
forecast
w
for
Polsce
Poland in
to
terms
jest
of
minimum
achieving
2050.
WHO goals by
Dziękuję bardzo.
2030. We will do that by about 2050 in Poland. Thank you so much, Professor.
It seems that the knowledge that in the entrusted budget HCV can be included is not well known. Patients don't know about it, and sometimes even GPs don't know it, or maybe they might be concerned. I know that from other talks and discussions that they may fear against referring a patient to perform such a test. It's a short intervention, so it should not be burdensome. So the problem seems to be elsewhere in the awareness, in that knowledge. We've already talked in the past, and that's why we decided to talk about the support of local government units, because it's on hands on board when it comes to prevention and prophylaxis of HCV, because we are quite close to eradicating. We have great effective treatments. We have a very good drug program. It's quite simple, actually. We also have testing on the GP level, on the primary healthcare level. So in this, we hope that these educational measures can boost the effectiveness of the actions taken as part of this entrusted budget. We hope that the regulator will add more funds and that those quite cheap tests will be performed in greater volumes. And we also have another risk group which could be used, for example, as part of the health policy program. Very shortly, could you tell us, please, about what risk groups we are talking about, in your opinion, in the opinion of the Polish group of experts?
Grupy ryzyka są definiowane.
So, risk groups are defined. So, with regard to elderly people, we are talking about people who had numerous contacts with the healthcare service, because a lot of the infections were nosocomial infections. But we should also take into account prisoners, people who in the past used intravenous drugs. And contrary to what one might think, it's not a narrow group of druggies or addicts. We are coming across a lot of people who, when being middle-aged or when they were young, they had some occasional contacts with these forms of recreational drugs. We also are dealing with people
jeżeli mają jakieś
who,
dolegliwości,
if they have any ailments or if they have increased liver enzymes,
nas najbardziej boli, bo
they are
jeżeli
not
pacjent wie
diagnosed
o tym,
because
że
if a patient knows that they have
lekarz wie o
increased
wyglądu trzęsienia,
liver enzymes, if the
nie rozumie,
doctor
dlaczego
knows
te
it,
badania
we do
nie
not
są
understand why those tests are
Mógłbym
not
tutaj całości
automatically performed.
godzinami na ten
So
temat
we could be
mówić.
talking about it for a long time,
Musimy się zastanowić,
but we
do
have to
kogo
think about
ma być skierowany
who should we
akcja edukacyjna.
address
Bo
this
ja sobie wyobrażam to w ten
education
sposób, że
communication.
po pierwsze kierujemy akcję edukacyjną do
So first of
pacjenta,
all, we are
mówiąc o tym, żeby
directing our
pacjent
messages to
wywierał
the
nacisk
patient
na tego
so that
lekarza
the
rodzinnego,
patient
żeby
pressures the
wykonał tego
GP
typu badania.
to perform such tests.
I tutaj mimo wielu akcji nadal jest
Despite
olbrzymi
numerous
protokół
campaigns,
popisu
still there is a lot to be done.
edukacji.
We can see the need for education. We have to continuously talk about it. We have to educate patients. But also, some of our communication efforts should be directed to the people who are responsible for organizing healthcare. I presented earlier a slide about organizing costs. Believe me, the costs of treating renal cell carcinoma or liver cirrhosis, we're talking about hundreds of thousands of Polish zloty. And one test is the cost of 4 or 5 Polish zloty. Let's notice the disproportion between those amounts. Those 5 zloty spent on the tests and maybe 20,000 spent on treatment at an early stage helps us avoid hundreds of thousands of Polish zloty on advanced treatment. It is good value for money for everyone. And now giving the floor to Marshal Kolek. But before that, also a short question to the Tiger, to the director. If we were to test patients at hospital emergency departments, it's actually a good idea because very often patients spend a long time waiting for assistance in emergency departments. They could perform a short survey, and such a program could be performed. However, we should remember that those departments are usually short-staffed. But so when the workload is too high, it might be difficult. But it could be a solution if in the department, let's say a night and holiday care over patients, that's where we could maybe suggest such a survey to screen patients. And now, giving the floor to Marshal Kolek. Thank you. Because thank you for giving me the floor. Because it turns out I have to run because I'm needed elsewhere. But what is being said by Maciek Wójcik, the question of the medical fund and the solutions that were practiced in the past. So primary healthcare funds spent on prophylaxis, that's a good direction. What is being said right now is quite obvious to me. It should be done on a large scale. I think that others will agree. At the upcoming sessions of the Health Committee, we will be broaching this subject. We will be searching for a good solution. I'm not sure if testing at emergency departments is a good idea because emergency departments are already quite burdened and understaffed. We should search for a different solution, I think. But this is something we can think about. If we can engage the professor in this discussion, we will be happy to invite him to our next session, and we'll be talking about it on a national level. When we talk about testing at the emergency departments, we only said that in certain risk groups we could maybe add an additional point to the survey that if blood is to be drawn anyway, HCV could be tested for, and this would not be so burdensome for the staff. I think that we could also do it in emergency departments as a supplementary solution, but it shouldn't be the core solution. I'm not really concerned about the short-staffed departments, although that obviously is a problem as well, but we should keep in mind that testing with those so-called rapid tests can be done by a nurse. So a finger prick test, like in the case of glycemic control, is a solution. 10 minutes, a finger prick test, and we have a preliminary result. It can be read by a nurse. It would not be so much of a burden for the personnel at the emergency department. However, I would like to declare my willingness to assist in the negotiations, in the discussions. I would be happy to do so. Thank you for this declaration. I'm always happy, we are always happy when those debates spark future cooperation between stakeholders. And I'm happy to hear that everyone so is interested in further discussions. And now, Mr. Marek Wójcik, we talked earlier about financing, but please also comment the issue of HCV. I know you wanted to do that. Well, yes, I'll keep it brief because this meeting is quite dynamic. I will return to those emergency departments. Very often we just pretend to do certain actions. For example, occupational medicine. Why are tests allowing people to start employment necessary?
There are great differences in epidemiology across the globe. If we look at the eastern part of Europe or the Far East and Africa, so I don't see any reason for introducing anything to prevent us from introducing to occupational medicine such basic examinations. We could also introduce laboratory diagnostic examinations and expand the standard set of examinations. So I wanted to say that openly. I think that one of the sources of funding can be employers. It's obvious here. We can give them specific figures to confirm that their interests lie in early diagnosis of diseases in their workforce. LGU funding. We had the sugar tax, but we also have the tax on beverages, and we have a lot of revenues coming in from that tax to LGUs. But that means that a lot of beverages are being consumed. So on the one hand, the revenues are higher, but there's this joke. Somebody asks a 100-year-old man, "Why are you so healthy?" And he said, "I have a shock alcohol therapy, and I do that therapy once a year. And how much do you drink then?" "I don't drink anything, but just for one day. Then I go back to drinking." That was just a joke. Citizen budgets. This is very important. This is progressing slowly, but I encourage you to participate in citizen participatory budgets. This is also within the remit of LGUs. And we can cover a large population from such participatory budgets. And I'll say something that may sound as a blasphemy to LGU officials. But maybe one day this will come true. In Poland, we have more than 300 communal associations, more than 400 of LGU associations, lots of different associations of local governments and communes. I know only one case where such associations go for soft programs together. We can do projects on wastewater and water treatment, so why can't we work together, especially small LGUs, which have limited capacity and had always had limited capacity? to transfer such tasks to associations of communes or LGUs. And this is a very interesting partnership because we can combine the potential of people who are actually involved in this, involved in healthcare programs. I think this is an important source of support. And I wanted to mention it because maybe this will open the channel I just mentioned. Thank you so much. A lot has happened in this year as concerns the external environment of LGUs, also in terms of vaccination. A lot has happened in the area of vaccination. Therefore, I'm sure we will happily listen to what Mr. Michał Severin has to tell us. That's the next point of our program. Pathways for financing adult vaccination. This is an educational lecture by GSK. I hand over to Michał Severin.
Thank you so much. I will divide my presentation into three parts. The first one will be a short retrospective of what we used to deal with in the past. Then I will present the current situation, and then I will talk a little about what we can face in the future. I won't be dreaming, I will be presenting you with the real situation. A few years ago, many years ago, actually, I stopped being the voivodeship sanitary inspector. But as that, during that role, I used to take part in council meetings where we talked about vaccination programs. And it was quite sad because there were professors saying what they would like, where finance representatives of the authorities would say, well, we would like that too, but nothing really happened. The preventive vaccination program was not sufficiently developed. And recently, we have been experiencing a lot of progress. This is an important program because we cannot not mention the huge role of local government units with regard to raising awareness and the need for financing preventive vaccinations. So everywhere where the vaccination programs were not sufficient, where we were way behind different countries, that's where the local governments would step in. This applies to HPV, this applies to influenza, this applies to similar or pneumococci. At the same time, we are observing that those vaccinations are no longer left behind. So we can see that influenza shot is being, the flu shot is being reimbursed as part of pharmacy treatment. For many years, the program which for many years was lagging behind is currently gaining momentum, and something which is quite new is the Ministry of Health announcement that they will be financing not just obligatory but also recommended vaccines, and also the news about involving funds from the medical fund and vaccinations for HPV. So definitely a lot is happening in the area of vaccinations. This was also it had the background of what will happen if vaccinations are moved to the NHF budget. That raised concerns, but the current situation is actually quite good. This slide presents the fact that the state became a bit more flexible with regard to vaccination programs does not mean that local governments stop their initiatives. And it's good news because vaccinations, not all vaccines are reimbursed. And I agree with Mr. Wójcik's appeal, his message, where he calls upon the local government units that they should continue to do so. There is a need for that because our previous experience with local governments is that where the state authorities are lagging behind, the local governments are not afraid to take up a new challenge. And this is an important element. The vaccination I would like to talk about is Shingrix. It is a vaccination against shingles. It recently became the recommended vaccine also in Poland. It is a vaccine which is effective and has proven effectiveness, especially in elderly patients and immunocompromised patients. We are talking about hemato-oncological patients, about patients who underwent a transplant. And it is a vaccine which is used and reimbursed in various EU countries. On the example of this vaccine, I would like to show you and present a certain potential that I see in the Polish reimbursement system. So obviously we have the medical fund, an institution which for Polish conditions is quite new, but it offers us two options. Something that might happen and happened in the case of HPV, so a decision to finance the recommended vaccinations. It gives grounds for example, also financing a Shingrix vaccine. So far, the decision has not been made, but it is possible. But we also have the sub-fund for prevention development. This also gives grounds for self-governments to obtain funds in areas where the Ministry of Health sees an unmet health need and decides that financing of the vaccine is justified. So that's quite obvious. I'm presenting what the situation is right now, what makes people active in the healthcare quite hopeful. I have been participating in various debates on vaccinations, and it's quite sad actually, because when we are talking about vaccinations, people tend to leave the sessions. High-level officials usually leave the discussion because nobody really cares that much about this subject. Fortunately, this is currently changing, and we want it to continue to change. And where else is the potential? Where else can we find financing for vaccinations? We also talked today about this facilitated access to prevention, and I myself consider it to be very important. The professor also talked about educating the healthcare providers. As you might know, there are some areas related to vaccination where the healthcare providers are not so willing to vaccinate people. This is quite a disturbing phenomenon, but there are also studies which demonstrate that sometimes solutions which result in facilitated access can be quite effective and important. And sometimes the decisions of the healthcare professional not to undergo vaccinations themselves are not really rational. They are not anti-vaccine advocates. They simply find the system to be quite complex, and the system doesn't foster this decision. So, in situations where there are mobile vaccination points in healthcare facilities, turns out that the vaccination rate against flu rises dramatically. So a simple facilitation of the vaccine does the trick. If they don't need to make an appointment, if they don't need to commute to take the shot, they usually decide to take that option. So in this context, we should think about flexibility of funding as a in a similar manner. It seems to be quite revolutionary to finance vaccines as part of drug programs, because drug programs are theoretically designed for expensive drugs. However, we do have some examples of that. For example, vaccinations preventing CMV reactivation. Such technologies are financed under drug programs. So maybe other vaccines could also be financed as part of drug programs. We should consider to which groups should this vaccine be addressed. So this is food for thought. Another thing which we should consider, today we have a lot of patients treated under drug programs. So a vaccine which I'm presenting right now, directed at hemato-oncological patients, why not consider to include hemato-oncological patients? Why not subject them to prevention of shingles, to provide them additional protection and potentially avoid complications, which in the case of those patients can be quite dangerous. The chemotherapy catalogue. So right now we are opening up for different substances which are broadly understood as connected with cancer treatment. Maybe vaccination prevention could be an element of oncological treatment, in this way that those patients should be immunized to make sure that those patients receive facilitated access to the vaccine in the same facility where they are receiving current treatment. Also, the list of services added on to other services. So patients who are receiving treatment following a transplant, so immunocompromised patients for whom the vaccination should also be considered. Why? As part of treatment of those patients, and while those patients are undergoing hospitalization, why a vaccination should not be included in this? The idea should be that when we finance the vaccinations, we should not do it in one model. We should not hope that the local governments will take care of it, or the central government will take care of it. We should create a few subsystems of financing vaccinations so that the vaccinations reach the target groups and maybe a more general population. We should do this, we should include it everywhere where we have a greater chance of patients benefiting from this technology. So if a doctor tells the patient it is worth that you get vaccinated because you are in a risk group, you are a cancer patient, for example, then and if that patient is given the opportunity to receive that vaccine easily, the chances of that patient getting vaccinated increases dramatically. It is much more likely that this patient will be vaccinated rather than if he was left to his own devices with this recommendation. The last type of financing is as part of the list of services contracted separately. So those patients could have be subject to also this manner of financing services. To sum up, today we have a few different systems of financing vaccinations. Three main methods: the NHF budget, the government budget, and the local government budgets. It's good that we have a diversification in this regard. We should not dismiss any forms of financing only because a different leg, so to speak, is gaining momentum. The role of local governments is absolutely very important because they're the so-called trailblazers. They everything that is currently financed by the state government usually starts at the local grassroots level. So we should definitely start initiating local projects before the national level joins in. So we should continue searching for new routes of financing. We should provide the healthcare professionals with ways to easily suggest patients to use the possibility to get vaccinated easily, and that should be secured on the financial front. So I would like to finish up with an optimistic note. I sincerely hope that the new emerging vaccines that will continue, that are emerging right now and which will continue to emerge, will be able to benefit from this effective way of obtaining funding, and that vaccines cease to be left somewhere behind in the dust.
Thank you. I'm very pleased that you see a role for LGUs in this process, in exerting pressure onto the regulator. And I can reciprocate by by expressing my true opinion that LGUs appreciate the activities of sanitary inspection, that is, providing data, conducting educational activities. We can see that this coexistence is a win-win situation for both sides. And the information about opportunities for funding vaccination, as Professor Brydak used to say and still says, for vaccination advocates, this is some very good information. Let's continue working in this area. And the next issue is vaccination against pneumococci in oncological patients. We have a real tsunami in terms of diagnostics and prevalence here. So every action to support oncological patients and improving treatment outcomes is much needed and awaited. There is a lot of LGU activities that can be funded under the present regulations. That's why we invited Professor Marcin Pasiarski, who will take up 13 minutes with his presentation, and then we will have a couple of minutes for a discussion. 13 minutes for an area that is 2,500 years old. Vaccination, it does not come from the 18th century and generous vaccination, but the first attempt at immunization by the Chinese in 500 BC. That was the pre-Jenner era. The Chinese didn't even have a word for it, but only 13 minutes for such a vast area. I hand over to the professor to tell us about vaccination per se, but the professor is a practitioner. He has tested the public health program in cooperation with the Marshall Office, and from zero to hero, so to say. I'm talking about the program, of course. The program was rejected because first we were rejected, but then we were praised for the program. Everyone understood why the program is so important. Let me hand over to the professor. Why is it important? Vaccination in oncological patients. This seems a completely obvious and understandable issue, but 20, 30 years ago, preventive vaccination in patients with autoimmune or oncological diseases were taboo. Many people, including physicians, would say that this is unacceptable to conduct such vaccination. So we made a leap from a situation where such vaccination was inadmissible to conducting such vaccination and supporting oncological treatment. Over the about 30 years, there has been a drastic change, because I remember when I studied, this was a taboo topic. Why do we want to vaccinate oncological patients? According to CVC, every oncological disease is a dysfunction of the immune system, every single one of them without exception. When we're talking about the dysfunctions of the immune system, we need to say that infectious diseases will be much more severe in those patients. They will take longer, and they will introduce vast changes in the organisms of patients, and they can result in deaths. What is more, oncological treatment increases immunosuppression. We have a lot of chemotherapy catalogs in Poland. We have drugs with molecules which achieve specific molecular goals or stimulate our immune system or suppress our immune system. We also have natural biological treatment, CAR-T or CAR-NT. Still, all therapies at the end of the day will introduce some pathology in the immune system, which can end tragically for an oncological patient. Due to the dysfunction of the immune system, the frequency of infections will increase. What are the consequences? If any infectious disease is contracted, especially a serious infectious disease, which renders it necessary to pause chemotherapy in a patient who requires such treatment, this can have negative consequences. In oncology, in hemato-oncology, apart from the therapy itself, it's also important to administer the right intensity of the dose and also the frequency of doses. We have to keep to a timeline, for example, every 28 days or every 14 days or every day. We have a wide range of different therapies, but any interval in anti-cancer treatment has a negative effect. We are obliged to provide anti-cancer treatment. We have to stop it if there is a dysfunction of immune system or if there is an infection. For example, pneumonia or invasive pneumococcal disease. We have to bear in mind that although we don't have statistical figures that would clearly state how big a role infectious diseases play in oncological diseases, we have to say that between 40-60% of all deaths are not caused by oncological diseases, but by infections in oncological patients. In oncohematological patients, this is even 80%. Why are we talking about immunodeficiency and a deficiency of the immune system? I can't go into details due to time constraints. Still, I've already mentioned CVC. We also have the ACIP definition, but every oncological disease means compromised immunity and a deficiency of the immune system, which I've already mentioned. Oncological treatment is also a condition which leads to deficiencies of the immune system. We're talking about diseases, but let's remember about transplants, organ transplants, or those which are undergoing an immunosuppression treatment are also people with a faulty immune system. And this is also an indication for preventive vaccination. Infection in oncological patients is the most common complication of an oncological disease. This is the primary factor that can lead to the death of a patient. In hemato-oncology, we can see a dynamic progress here in terms of the number of new drugs, new clinical trials, new medical products which are being introduced to clinical practice. And it would take a few hours to list all of them, so I won't do that. We also have aggressive blood tumors, for example, leukemias, which are resistant to treatment. But most oncological patients have a chronic disease, have a dysfunction of the immune system, and that's what causes their death in most cases. As I've said, that is the most common cause of death. Why? Immunodeficiency is caused not just by the tumor itself, but also by oncological treatment. The compromised immune system increases the risk of infection and increases the severity of contracted infections. This is an important argument when discussing this at a central national level. If we prevent the contraction of an infection in an oncological patient, we will reduce the cost of that treatment, because we need to treat the oncological disease and the infection on top of that. Usually such patients require inpatient care and often in intensive care, specialist medical care. In this case, I'm discussing pneumococci, but there are other infectious diseases which can increase the risk of death. Infection-related complications in oncological patients. About 80% sooner or later experience such post-infection complications. Globally, up to 60% of patients with infections die. If we look at the share of those suffering from pneumonia, that's 50-60%. I don't have to say that even now in the 21st century, pneumonia is one of the most common causes of death, even in healthy populations. This has been revealed by the COVID-19 pandemic, but I won't go into details. About 30% of oncological patients who contract an infectious diseases dies. Therefore, it is one of the most common causes of death in oncological patients. We've said that infections are the main cause of death in oncological patients. Therefore, the topic of infection prevention and prevention of pneumococcal infections is so important. The most serious complication is pneumonia. And the most common source of hospital-acquired infections will be listed in a moment. We have outpatients, but we also have inpatients. Patients come to the outpatient clinic and receive a drug twice or once a month, and then the patients go home. And therefore, out of hospital infections will be the most common cause of infections, and those are caused by pneumococcal infections. And in patients with compromised immunity, such pneumococcal infections can lead to serious complications as the bacteria move down the respiratory tract, as they move down to the bronchi, they can lead to pneumococcal pneumonia or invasive pneumococcal disease, especially in immune incompetent patients which suffer from a deficient immune system due to treatment or other causes. It's also worth mentioning the vaccines that are being used. It's very important to know what to use to vaccinate, how to vaccinate, and when to vaccinate. We have two basic types. I'm not talking about the valency of these vaccinations. I'm just talking about their components. We have polysaccharide vaccines. They cover 23 antigens which are present on the surface of the bacteria cell. This seems to be a lot, but the polysaccharide vaccines, although they increase the levels of antibodies, we've heard this buzzword, antibody levels or antibody titers. So what do? They use up the pool of cells which have an immunity memory. So those cells which remember they have to respond to a given antigen are being used up. The number of these very useful cells is being diminished. Therefore, it's a good idea to use conjugate vaccines where we have the polysaccharide element combined with the protein element. And this stimulates memory cells and releasing the antigen levels. Therefore, conjugate vaccines are much more important in immunodeficient patients than polysaccharide vaccines. The current recommendations connecting pneumococcal vaccinations, I won't read everything out. I'll just point your attention to one thing. It is recommended to use conjugate vaccinations also in patients who have previously received vaccinations which were 7, 16, or 13 valent. These are recommended in populations 65 plus or in ages 19 through to 64 if they belong to a certain risk group. If we used a 10 or 13 valent vaccine, this does not prevent adding 15 or 20 or 21 valent vaccination on top of that. This is an important piece of information. Someone will say, we'll keep switching the vaccines using different valencies. But between us, nature, and bacteria, there's an arms race going on. We have to keep coming up with new vaccinations. In the world of biology, we have something called an antigen drift. The bacteria are hiding the antigens which are targeted by the vaccines. If we look at vaccines produced 30 years old, we would see that these have completely changed because the bacteria have hidden the sensitive antigens. The same mechanism works in pneumococcal vaccination. Therefore, we increase the number of antigen so that the vaccine works against as many types of bacteria as possible. Preventing infections is very important because we have a growing populations of patients in need of that. This population is growing for a number of reasons. I often get the question, why do we have more and more of oncological patients? Well, pollution, contamination of the environment, living conditions, higher levels of stress. Also, the food we're consuming, our physical activity, sitting in front of the TV, on the couch. This process progresses as our civilization develops. So we have a larger and larger population of patients. And in many oncological patients, these illnesses are not terminal. They are chronic diseases. They are not curable, but they're not terminal. And therefore, we need to provide solutions such as preventive vaccination to eliminate the consequences of infectious diseases. And because we are failing at preventive vaccination, more deaths are caused by infectious diseases than by oncological diseases. I don't want to bore you to death, so just on a final note, I'll say that we need to vaccinate as soon as we diagnose a patient. There are tumors, there are cancers that can wait. Just three. I must limit myself to 3 reasons. Firstly, if we don't provide timely vaccination, the immune system will be so compromised it will not respond to the vaccine. We also have to hurry because we have cancers that are urgent and we must start treatment immediately. And the time for responding to a preventive vaccination is at least 2 weeks. So if we have diagnosed a cancer histopathologically, but we're waiting for staging, for imaging, for PET, for a computed tomography, we can vaccinate the patient already at that stage. That's what we did at the Warsaw Center for Oncology. But this is a discussion for the next 20 years to discuss how we did that. One last thing to bear in mind. How can we evaluate the effectiveness of vaccination? These first 3 points are supposed to scare you a bit. The specific antibody level. This is for experts. I want to put you at ease. Nobody will require this knowledge from LGUs. But what we have to require is the quality of vaccinated persons as a measure of effectiveness. The decrease in infections in a population, this is easy data to obtain even from anonymized databases. And of course, raising awareness, not just about the benefits of the vaccination, but also about the benefits for oncological treatments. So informing patients that this will prevent pausing the oncological treatment. To sum up, these are the 3 most important things. Raising awareness, decreasing the infection rate, and increasing the vaccination rate. This is important for patients and also their families for any campaign that promotes preventive vaccination to succeed. Thank you very much, Professor. That was not enough time for me.
You've actually managed to stick to your time. However, you spoke very quickly. And ladies and gentlemen, because that is exactly why we should treat cancer patients against pneumococci and against what other diseases? Well, influenza, coronavirus, and influenza. But speaking of coronavirus, why don't we have vaccines? That's the question directed to the people who are watching us. Because elsewhere in Europe, they are available. Before we move on to the summary, I have to say what Cestach managed to do recently. I can now announce it because the program has been published on the association's website. Cestach developed a prevention program on pneumococci for cancer patients. We updated what we did before. And then the professor implemented it in the Lower Silesian voivodeship. This program received a positive opinion of the HTA agency, and Warsaw will be implementing this program as well. On the basis of that program, a model will be created, which we as the association will be promoting. It will be part of the Healthy Humans Prevention Program. I imagine some workshops in this regard will also be held. It is important that we know, and thanks to the fact that all the sessions are recorded, you will be able to re-watch all the arguments in favor of the vaccinations. We are left with 10 minutes, and that's why I will ask all of our lecturers to sum up. Mr. Tomasiewicz first, the key messages that you'd like to leave us with for local government officials and the around 200 people who are currently listening to us. I think that the main message is that prevention is the key to all our actions. We should be aware of that. This was presented in my lecture, that prevention is possible and it treats people. Prevention of the consequences of HCV infections, but also prevention of infections themselves, because that way we eradicate the source of infections, so we stop this chain of infections in the society. It fits in well with what was mentioned by many of the people before, where we should keep in mind that we will be promoting the vaccines. And I agree with Professor Pasielski that this education of also regarding healthcare professionals is a must. I might say something which might not sound that good, but our observations regarding COVID-19 vaccinations show that some of our healthcare professionals did quite a lot of harm towards increasing awareness. We often had patients saying that their doctors said, with your comorbidities, you should not be getting vaccinations, which is absolutely not true. So this negative approach of many people towards vaccinations is the consequence of irrational statements uttered also by healthcare professionals. So we all need to present the same position. We have to educate people, we have to incentivize people to take action. Now, the Director Tadeusz Jędrzejczyk. Well, we've heard a lot of interesting voices today, pointing mostly to two areas which are of interest to local government units. I think that the proposal should go towards two directions. I also am thinking about the need for a systemic change. So as we know, local government units often use ready-made recommendations for programs, or they use ready-made good practices. So if there is a well-proven program for, let's say, cancer patients, which is not that costly, for which funds can be achieved easily, why not do it? That would mean that the role of the regulator should be more concentrated on evaluating in the real-world practice, so provide practical assistance. Because local governments don't have the practical tools, they can only provide data, how many people we have vaccinated, but the local governments don't have this hard data, and it seems that it's possible from the level of the regulator. Now, Professor Marcin Pasiarski. I would definitely like this vaccination program to be, for cancer patients to be expanded, not just for pneumococci, but also the aforementioned pathogens, so influenza or COVID. And also, as I've already said, we need to educate the patients and their families. In our case, education played a huge role with regard to pneumococci. So one patient would share the knowledge with another patient, or the family members would convince the patient about the need to secure their health. And this basic conclusion, which was already mentioned, we need to educate the healthcare professionals as well, also with regard to taking a uniform position which should be strongly promoted. Yes, preventive vaccinations are very important in all groups of people, not just patients, also potential patients, but particularly in risk groups, be it cancer patients or other patients. And now Michał Seweryn. I have two voices struggling inside of my head. On the one hand, it's my background as an epidemiologist. On the other hand, me being a professional in health economics. I tend to contest or various statements saying that prophylaxis prevention is always a good idea. It's always cost effective. Not always, however, it often is. We have a whole range of proven cost effective interventions in the area of intervention, and the vaccinations we discussed are among those. So it is worth to use them, it is worth to finance them. Local government units should keep in mind that they can implement them, and it is also worth that decision makers, whom we don't see here in this room today, they should keep in mind that it is an action towards improving the general health condition of people in Poland. Yes, we'll be sending a link to this debate to decision makers. I've already learned that more self-governance is important, and local governments should be deciding on what they do. They should act autonomously. They should be provided with the necessary funds, which cannot be used for other undue objectives. We should keep in mind that those programs should involve GPs, and we should facilitate access to services. We should keep that in mind. We want to keep the healthcare policy programs as simple as possible. We will be cooperating with the Healthy Cities Association to promote proven solutions. We have some ideas for the future. We'll definitely have to organize a separate conference discussing the actions of the local governments. There is hope in the local self-governments, so we should go and vote in the upcoming election. We will have another election in the spring as well. We will be implementing a model program for self-governments regarding educating on the topic of infectious diseases. And to whoever is watching us online, remember, if you ask us whether a healthcare program is feasible, we will try to provide you with the answers. And I will ask Mr. Marek Wójcik to close up our session today. Thank you so much, but I will refer to what you just said. First of all, with regard to cooperation, on the website of our association, this recording will also be posted. But we also have a recording of our first meeting with the Polish HTA agency devoted to what should be done to introduce free of charge drugs for selected patients. Vaccinations are for free. That was the first and last meeting. The conclusions were quite interesting. I also encourage you to adopt a principle which I heard from someone else, someone wiser than me, that if we want to find the right place for our programs, you should not hesitate and take action. So we are keep fingers crossed for the marshal in the upcoming elections. I will talk about two other things. First of all, this is my copy of the Polish Constitution. It is quite worn and torn because I was once struggling with anti-vaccine advocates who threw it to the ground. So that was quite an event, quite an experience. Why I'm saying this? We have Article 38 in this Constitution, subsection 4. So the public health authorities are obliged to combat infectious diseases. I do not want to beat around the bush. We should stop saying that we should allow unvaccinated healthcare professionals to work. We should quote this article. So healthcare personnel, teachers, they should definitely be vaccinated, regardless of what they do. I'm quite radical in this regard. And I also think that people who are vaccinated should pay a lower health insurance premium, because to me it's quite simple. They will be sick less often. I don't know if you know Wojciech Młynarski's song, in which this singer, this well-known Polish singer, sings that if you don't know something, you are a lesser person. We know, and in the chorus he says that there are some doctors who can fix your situation. That's thinking and reading. So we have to educate, we have to think, and we have to read. We have to reach young people. They are great, they are very wise. We talk about educating children, but I'm talking about educating adolescents, the young people. They are a great target group. If we manage to reach them, they will be teaching their children. This is the target group for our educational measures, educational efforts, so that, and I hope I see it one day, that Młynarski was wrong. After those civilization changes, one generation shift is enough for us to have an improved situation. And with those optimistic words, I would like to close this particular session. I would like to thank all our lecturers here in the studio and online. Thank you for bearing with us. The question is, you definitely deserve an applause for bearing with us until the very end.